What if I told you that you could see the future of a pandemic? I'm not talking about a crystal ball here. I'm talking about math. Today, we're going to dive into the world of mathematical models. These are basically our eyes in the fight against infectious diseases, our secret weapon for predicting and hopefully controlling their spread. Okay, so picture this. A brand new virus pops up. Nobody knows what it is. Chaos, right? Fear starts spreading almost as fast as the disease itself. It's a terrifying question. How do you fight an enemy you can't even see? Well, while everyone's holding their breath for a vaccine, there's another tool that becomes our first line of defense. And that tool is mathematical modeling.
So what's the deal with these models? How do they actually work? Well, you can think of them as a kind of glimpse into the future. They're basically powerful simulators that let us ask all those critical what-if questions. What if we close schools? What happens if a new variant is way more transmissible? Models let us play out all these scenarios safely right on a computer, instead of having to experiment in the real world. Phew!
Okay, but here's something we have to get straight right from the start. As this quote says, a model is always technically wrong. I mean, come on, it can't possibly capture every single little detail of our incredibly complex world. But that's not the point. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to be a useful approximation. Think of it like a simplified map that helps us find our way through a really chaotic reality.
So what exactly is the simplified version of reality? A mathematical model is, well, it's just that, a description of how a system works, but using the language of math. What it does, and this is the key, is it intentionally strips away all the background noise to focus only on the absolute essential things that control how a disease spreads.
And why does that matter so much? Because these models let us really understand how a disease moves through a population, forecast where it's going next, and this is the big one, test the potential impact of our choices. We can actually simulate things like vaccines or social distancing to get a good idea of what might work before we go and ask millions of people to completely change their lives. That's huge.
Now, these models basically come in two main flavors. First, you've got deterministic models. Think of these like a single weather forecast that predicts the average outcome. But, an outbreak isn't always average, right? That's where stochastic models come in. They totally embrace randomness. It's like they're rolling the dice over and over again. So instead of one future, they give us a whole range of possible futures, which is absolutely crucial for understanding the best and worst case scenarios, especially early on.
All right, so we get what models are, but how do they, work? Let's pop the hood and take a look at the engine that actually powers these predictions.
Okay, the most common way to do this is to sort the entire population into different buckets, or what scientists call compartments. It's a really simple idea, but it's an incredibly powerful way to bring some order to the chaos.
First up, we have our S bucket. S is for susceptible. At the very start of an outbreak, this is pretty much all of us. Everyone who is healthy but has no immunity, which means you're at risk of getting sick. Next, you've got the I bucket for infected. So, once a susceptible person gets sick, boom, they move from the S bucket into this one. These are the people who are actively contagious and can pass the disease to others. And finally, there's the R bucket, which stands for recovered or removed. This is for people who've recovered and now have immunity, or sadly, for those who have passed away. And that's it. That's the fundamental flow of an epidemic. People moving from susceptible to infected to recovered.
So the million-dollar question is, how fast are people moving from that I bucket and infecting the S bucket? Well, that's measured by a number I'm sure you've heard thrown around, R0, or R0. This little number represents the raw, unfiltered infectious power of a virus. So if R0 is 3, it means that one sick person, in a population where nobody is immune, will go on to infect an average of 3 other people.
And this R0 number, it's not magic. It's actually just made up of 3 pretty simple things. First, you've got P. That's the probability that the disease actually gets transmitted if 2 people make contact. Then there's C, which is the rate of contact. Basically, how many people an infected person sees. And last, D, the duration of how long they're infectious. That's the whole recipe. Probability, contact, and duration. Simple as that.
And this brings us to the single most important goal in trying to control any outbreak. See, R0 is the virus's raw power, but the effective R is what's happening in the real world, right now, with all our interventions in immunity. And the goal, the entire point of every mask, every lockdown, every vaccine, is to push that effective R below the magic number 1.
So how do we do that? Simple. We attack the very things that make up R in the first place. Social distancing, that's all about reducing C, the rate of contact. Vaccines, They hammer P, the probability of transmission. And treatments, they can shorten D, the duration of infectiousness. It's literally a direct assault on the mathematics of the disease.
Okay, so this isn't just a bunch of abstract theory. Let's zoom back out for a second and see how these exact concepts have been used to fight real diseases throughout modern history.
Yeah, this stuff is not a new science at all. From the early days of HIV/AIDS all the way to SARS, modeling has been absolutely critical. Take the 2015 Ebola crisis in West Africa. Models were the tools that helped predict how many hospital beds they were going to need, and they identified a crucial factor, that unsafe burial practices were a key driver of transmission. You had over 100 different models being published, all trying to help guide the response on the ground.
And this all becomes super practical when a vaccine finally shows up. Models are absolutely essential for creating the strategic roadmap. They help answer those massive critical questions like, okay, what percentage of the population do we actually need to vaccinate to get to herd immunity? And who do we give it to first to save the most lives? These are the questions models are built to answer.
But it is super important that we circle all the way back to that first point we made. For all their power, we have to remember what these models aren't. They are not crystal balls.
You see, every single model is a trade-off. To make the math even possible, you have to simplify the messy, complicated reality of human behavior. So the real art, the key, is to make smart assumptions. Assumptions that capture the real essence of the problem without making it so complex that it just becomes useless.
And that brings us to maybe the biggest hurdle of them all, data. A model is only ever as good as the numbers you feed into it. It's like the quote says, the main challenge is just getting good data. Think about it. In the middle of the chaos of a new outbreak, trying to figure out exactly how transmissible a new virus is, that can be the hardest part of the entire job.
So in the end, I think that's the real power of these models. They don't predict some single unavoidable fate. That's not what they do. They show us the consequences of our choices, they map out all the different roads that lie ahead, but ultimately, it's our collective actions that decide which one of those paths we, as a society, actually walk down.